So what was your first motorcycle getting into the adventure motorcycle riding? Chances are it was a Kawasaki KLR 650. I know it was for me and for hundreds of others. And so for this episode of Utah ADV, I want to talk about my first motorcycle and the one that I got the most miles on throughout the state of Utah. My touring started really about 20 years ago with a rather rare motorcycle. It's called a Blackbird. It's a Honda CBR 1100XX. This was a 99, and this was a remarkable motorcycle. This bike took us around the western United States, tens of thousands of miles on this, and really enjoyed it, but it wasn't that great for a pillion to ride, also known as my spouse. So I picked up another Honda, and this one was a Valkyrie, the Valkyrie Interstate. And this is a big bagger, a big cruiser with plenty of seat room in the back. It was very comfortable compared to the Blackbird, and my pillion was pretty happy for a while, at least up until the point where she opted out for her own motorcycle, and who can blame her, right? So that went its merry way, and so did my CBR 1100XX. And I went for a period of time without a motorcycle, and I had this motorcycle-shaped hole in my soul. All things being what they were with all the experience I had on the road, I wanted to try something more off-road, okay, more on the dirt, something that might give me a little bit of variety to do both of them as much as I possibly could. And so according to my research, the bike that could do both of them marginally well was the Kawasaki KLR 650. This particular KLR came with a set of Pelican cases as panniers, and they were under a different name and rebadged, repurposed here. But being a film guy, I love Pelican cases, and I really like the idea of using those for panniers. So that's one of the main reasons why I decided to go with this particular KLR. So I kind of took inventory of the bike and decided what it needed, and I did that over time. I didn't do all these modifications immediately. For me, when I get a vehicle, regardless if it's two wheels or four wheels, I'll run it for a while and put it out in its element to see how it's going to perform, and then kind of note its shortcomings. One of the biggest shortcomings of the KLR, and I think everybody here will agree, was its suspension. The rear suspension on the KLR is adjustable, but after going through and taking a look at mine and trying to go through and adjust it, I realized that the little screw that adjusted it was just spinning in place. There was making no difference whatsoever. So that was the first to go. So I replaced that shock, the rear shock, with a Progressive 465 monotube shock, and this is it's a coilover kind of a shock, and highly adjustable. And the installation on that was pretty straightforward, not long to go through and get that installed. And then the next thing I got into were the Progressive springs, the fork springs as well, and replaced those along with the fork oil up front. And once I got it all back together again, I went on a pretty long ride up through the spine of Utah, along the Cottonwood Road. And the difference was unbelievable. I felt like I had a brand new motorcycle. The bike had better absorption. I had probably about 70 pounds loaded on there, along with me at 240 pounds. I couldn't feel any load on the bike whatsoever. Lots of great response on the front. It's got a pretty good rack as it goes there, the position of the front forks on this, but this just made it more dynamic and kept the front tire on the road, especially in technical situations. It just made a great difference. And then being able to dial in the rear monoshock was a luxury that I had yet to experience on any kind of motorcycle, let alone something off-road. Another thing that needed to change for me on the bike was its ability to have auxiliary lighting. And to start off with there, I installed a Blue Sea ST fuse box to go through and kind of route out the different electronic circuits that I would need. I wanted one for a GPS, one to charge my phone, and then one to go to the lights there. And the lights that I use are made by Trailtech. They're the Trailtech Equinox lamp. They are adjustable. They has a little switch on the back of the lamps to go through and give me 3 different types of power on that. And I decided to mount those lamps in the position where the turn stocks were on the KLR. And to do that, then I needed to relocate a turn signal. I added the SW-Motech handguard. And the handguards have an insert that you can take out and replace with an LED signal. And so I wired that in, and that's became the replacement for my turn signals, while I was able to have the Equinox lights in the position of the turn stocks, and all integrated fairly nicely. I didn't want to really draw attention necessarily to the motorcycle, keep it looking as stock as I possibly could. The next electronic modification that I needed to make was due to a modification of the bike itself. And that's where I removed the license plate holder because it hung down really low, and I moved it up onto the rear fender. And in doing so, it deleted the rear license plate lamp. And in Utah, it's allowed to go through and have that illuminated. So I added a couple of license plate frame lights and wired them into the bike's current electrical for illumination, and it worked out just fine. As stout as the KLR was, it needed some extra protection in some vulnerable areas, not the least of which is the engine and the radiator. So I added an SW-Motech guard for that area, and the installation on that was pretty straightforward and easy to do. And then after that, I already talked about the SW-Motech handguards that I got. And really, these are kind of a bark buster setup as far as the rigid aluminum piece is concerned, and then the SW-Motech plastic piece that goes over that, the actual handguard itself, like I said, you can go through and change that little section of that to go through and insert a turn signal. And then 2 other areas in the bike that needed protection was the bottom of the engine. The cheap plastic kind of skid plate that came stock with the bike just wasn't enough for me, so I replaced that, also with an SW-Motech skid plate. And then the rear brake fluid reservoir needed a little bit of protection, and so I put a plate on that as well. And that too, I think it was made by SW-Motech. Obviously, looking at the pictures, I changed the paint scheme on the KLR. When I started off with kind of a light gray, kind of a military gray, first off on the front shroud, and then did contrasting black on the bike. And I didn't really care for that a whole lot, so I swapped that around and went with a flat black on the front shroud with a khaki on the tank, and then just kind of followed that theme throughout the rest of the bike. And I really liked how that came out. As rattle can jobs go, it wasn't the best. Needed to be sanded down and a couple more coats put on there, but for my intents and purposes, it worked out just fine, and I really liked the look that it established for the bike. The rear panniers on the bike were a couple of Pelican cases that have been rebranded, and I have a few Pelican cases hanging around in the garage, and so I added a Pelican top case. I think it's the 1500 on there as well. And with those 3 cases, I had ample room to go through and hold everything that I needed to tide me over for 2 or 3 days while I was camping down in southern Utah and then teaching at the university. I was able to go through and pack a tent, a sleeping pad, a sleeping bag, everything that I needed to cook with, all my clothes and food. Everything fit just well and got into a rhythm and a system that worked out very well for me. I originally placed the rubber on the KLR with Shinko 244s. At least that's what I thought they were. They were actually kind of a cheap clone or a knockoff of those, but they had the same tread pattern and things, and I rolled the dice and decided to try them out. And they worked out okay, except for the fact that the rear tire slips on the back rim, and when it did, it would go through and pinch the tube, and after a few hundred miles that way, the tube would give way, and I'd have a flat. So at about 4 weeks, I had 3 consecutive flat tires. I finally figured out that after I marked the tire to the rim, I finally figured out that the tire itself was rotating on the rim. It takes me a little while to figure things out. And so I replaced those and went with the Shinko 705s, and that turned out to be really the best tire. It's kind of an 80-20 tire, but as you can see, it was really aggressive enough for me to do what I wanted to do off-road and never left me hanging for traction. So overall, the 650 was a great motorcycle for me. It's heavy, it's lethargic, which was good if you just don't have your off-road, your ADV skills actually tuned in. It's going to train you to deal with a heavier bike. And so when you do upgrade from that, then you already kind of have that underneath you. Once I got the Pig, the KLR, tuned in, it was a great motorcycle to ride around. The one thing that it lacked for me, though, and that you might be interesting to you, is that anything above 70 miles an hour felt like I was taking my life into my hands. And there were times when I needed to make a straight shot back to northern Salt Lake from southern Utah, and that meant riding I-15, and the speed limit there is 80 miles an hour. And it just didn't have the oomph that I needed. I wanted something that would give me a little bit more peace of mind and power under my seat to get me to where I wanted to go. But outside of that, it's a mountain goat. It climbed and went anywhere I pointed it. I never had an issue with it other than the tires. So I went from the Kawasaki KLR 650 to the Triumph Tiger 800, and that was, wow, made a huge difference there, and fell in love with that bike, rode it for 2 years. And then when we decided to do the Pacific Northwest tour, I thought I'd pick up another motorcycle. That's when I picked up the Triumph Tiger Explorer 1200 and let Addie, my daughter, ride the 800. Then I rode the Explorer and off we went. So there you have it. The KLR 650, for those of you considering getting into this sport, if I can call it that, getting into ADV riding, adventure motorcycle riding, that's not a bad place to start. There are other great motorcycles out there, more along the dual sport side of things. If you want a light, nimble motorcycle, I just don't have the experience with that. So you might have to look somewhere else. Okay. So for Utah ADV, thanks for joining me on this episode, and we'll look forward to you in the next one.